Chris, does a jazz band need a bass player?
Absolutely.
Okay, does a jazz band need a guitar player?
Absolutely not.
Ooh, that's a cold take. All right, let's get into it. What is shaking, everybody? Welcome back to the Spinz Vinyl Outward Bound podcast, where we talk about all things jazz, at least in the present moment and in the near future, as we're doing this cool series on instrumentalists and focusing on one instrument at a time every single Monday at 8 p.m. Central. Welcome back, everybody. How's it going, Chris?
It's Monday. We're talking about jazz, trying to ignore all these election distractions. So I'm excited for tonight.
That's what I love about this too, is that like you can just kind of like leave everything at the door, guys, you know, any of the stuff, nonsense that's going on in the world and stuff like that, or things that are going on in your life, and just come here, grab yourself an adult beverage if you want to, some popcorn even, and just hang out and talk jazz. So I am ready for it. All right, we got a few things to take care of first, right, Chris? We got a few things we need to mention off the top.
Yeah, I just want to remind everybody, we've been posting playlists to complement each episode we're doing. We usually get them up a day or two after the episode airs, and you can check those out on Tidal and Spotify. Not yet equipped with Apple Music, but we have to do some work on that as well. What else is going on, Jason? It's a big week for us, right?
Yeah, man, a real big week. And so Wednesday is the day, guys. That's going to be super fun. That is the one where we're going to do the fantasy draft, the jazz band fantasy draft. We're going to have CB from WCB Jazz Vinyl is going to be here. We're going to have Felipe from the Jazz Bums is going to be here. I'm going to be here. Chris is going to be here. We're going to have tons of fun. And you guys are going to be here, by the way. We're going to have tons of fun creating our very unique, very interesting little jazz combos. And so that should be really, really cool, man. Who knows what could happen during that?
I'm a little intimidated, and we got some heavy hitters joining us in this competition. So I got to do my homework between now and Wednesday for sure.
Well, as I say, I think it's our job to like throw them off the scent as much as we can. I mean, we need to like, if we get first pick, we just got to, I don't know, we got to figure out, we can kind of see where they're trying to go with their combo and throw a wrench in the works, man.
Yeah, I don't know if we should be talking publicly about collusion. Might throw some controversy into the mix, but that's what we're looking for.
By the way, Whiskey Rocks, I'm sorry, but Whiskey Rocks is here, man. What's up, Whiskey? Good to see you. Good to see you. Fan of the show over on Whatnot, man. Thank you for being here. Chili and Salt, looking forward to Wednesday. Okay, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I saw Whiskey was in the house. I had to say something, man.
I'm psyched. We got some familiar faces. It's good to see everybody supporting the stream, and you guys are a big part of it. So thanks for joining once again.
Yeah, I love it, man. I love it. All right, today. So I know the thumbnail. What is the thumbnail show? Guitar players? Well, we decided in our infinite wisdom early on last week that we would do guitar players and bass players, because we're sort of like, are we going to be able to do enough? Like, we're going to go so deep into these artists. Just let's do both together. And then as we start getting into it, we're kind of like, man, maybe we could have did 2 videos on this, but that's okay. That's okay. Today's going to be really, really fun. We're going to start out doing bass players, and we're going to move into very carefully into guitar players. So that'll be really fun. It's kind of pluck string instruments today, if you will.
I like it. Well, I think it's important when we get into these conversations that we always start with the GOAT. So I think we should get right into it, Jason. Who's our GOAT for the week?
The GOAT for today, ladies and gentlemen. I wish I had a drum roll. We're starting with bass. Maybe you guys could even guess who the GOAT is. Boom. So we got to start with some Mingus. I picked 2 really great ones. And of course, whenever we do these shows, Chris, I always have to go back and like refresh my memory on these records. Some of them don't need refreshing. This is one of them, but I had to listen to it anyway. It's just fantastic, man. This is Mingus, which I'm going to call Mingus times 5 for the rest of the rest of the time I'm talking about this record. But this album kicks off with a fantastic tune, man. called, what's it called? I don't know what it's called. I deleted it. It's 2BS, I believe it's called. And it could easily be dropped in any soundtrack, any like a 50s film noir starring Paul Newman, James Dean. I mean, it's bluesy, it's swinging, it's frantic. It just has that energy that Mingus always brings to his compositions. I say always, he's very diverse, but when he kicks into some of these high energy compositions like that, like this one kicks off, it's just awesome. Chef's kiss for sure. Mingus, to me, I should say, I think of Mingus as a composer and as a storyteller. Yes, he's a bass player. Yes, he's a band leader. Yes, he's all these things. But for me, his compositions are second to none. I put him in the top 5 of composers in jazz, and a storyteller in the sense that his compositions really do tell stories for me, and his albums really tell stories to me. We could go on forever with The Clown and all the different ones. The one I'm about to show, The Same Way. There's a ton of albums that Mingus does. You probably picked one too. And for me, the way they're sequenced is very meaningful. I mean, they're just packed in a way that is as a story arc to me, as much as you can do a story arc with jazz music. And that is one of the things that I really appreciate about Mingus. That's why I put him at the very top as the GOAT. Another one's Theme for Lester Young, another beautiful piece that's much more kind of chilled out in tempo, not like the first track on here. Has a great vibe. It just really spotlights Mingus's gift as a composer. It's such a great composition. Drop the needle on Theme for Lester Young. It's fantastic. And kind of, I'm going to do 2, so I'm going to try to go quick here. But my final thoughts on Mingus times 5 is, like I said, I mean, it's a musical novel to me. It has peaks, valleys, drama, intensity, emotion. And it's just one of the great jazz albums of all time. And a lot of people that don't know a lot about jazz and maybe heard of music probably already recognize this cover or have heard this album. And for good reason. It's just a fantastic record. And then my second record has 2 titles. One is Jazz Portraits, which you see right there. But it's also known as Mingus in Wonderland. This one was put out by United Artists. And it's actually a very similar album to the last one, except on this one, we get very extended tracks, which I'm a huge fan of, dude. I mean, you got 12-minute Nostalgia in Times Square. You got 10 minutes on I Can't Get Started. You got 13 minutes on No Private Income Blues. You got almost 9 minutes on Alice's Wonderland. And I love when guys can just kind of stretch out and really kind of, I don't know, just like they don't feel so cramped. It's not a 3-minute tune. Like these guys get to really do their thing over an extended period of time. Nostalgia in Times Square is one of the big ones on here, if not the big one. Including, and I have to call out John Handy on alto on this one. He is so freaking great and creative. As soon as you hear him come in on track 1, it's just super fresh. It's fantastic, has technique, is nails. He's already in the first bar just telling you exactly who he is, man. And so that track is phenomenal. And then I also like No Private Income Blues, another fast tempo, swinging track. Mingus opens with a bass solo on that one, really demonstrating how strong he was as a soloist, because he is an incredible bass player too. And so final thoughts on this. I mean, every track actually on both of these records is just a clinic in jazz composition. I'd say like traditional bass playing in the sense that some of these other guys are really more sort of avant-garde. But just a phenomenal couple of records, man. A nice little twofer. If you want to just jump into Mingus, I would highly recommend these 2 records because they're a little less. Some of his other stuff, like I would put The Clown in there, put the Canthropus Erectus, and some of the other stuff Saint and Sinner Lady can be, at least in my opinion, it's almost like a stage 2 entry into Mingus. I just feel like with Jazz Portraits and Mingus times 5, they're just great entry points. So, all right, that's it, man. That's the GOAT right there. That's all I got, Chris. What do you got, man?
I didn't want you to stop, but I share the same opinions on Mingus. I mean, when I look at why he's the greatest, it's beyond the playing ability. it is the composition. And you know, when I think about my holy trinity of jazz being Monk, Coltrane, and Miles, I feel like Mingus is the protector of that world, right? He's kind of
Ooh.
the bouncer or the bodyguard. When I was
Literally
preparing for
and
this,
figuratively.
yeah, exactly. And you can hear in the music. When I was preparing for this last week and into the weekend, I can't believe how much Mingus I own, how much Mingus I have on record. Just kind of stood out there with some of the other artists that I love, even outside of jazz, and it just goes to show how extensive his catalog is. So the first record I'm going to show, this is my favorite Mingus record. I'm going to show a nice reissue of Mingus Blues and Roots.
Ooh.
And then I even have a mono reissue of this record. Blues and Roots came out in 1960, I believe, maybe 61. Really gives you a sense of Mingus as a composer and kind of a mood setter. This is a very contentious record. It's very vibrant, has a lot of elements of traditional jazz. It gets a little funky, gets a little fuzzy, a little garage sounding at times. Very intense record. And there are a lot of great entry points to Mingus, but I always recommend Blues and Roots to people. This is just one that is completely electric from front to back. I don't really have a standout track on this. Really front to back, as what a lot of the Mingus albums I'm going to talk about. Really just a great play front to back. For you, Jason,
that's the thing about a lot of Mingus's work is you're almost doing them an injustice if you do call out one more than the other, because it, you know, kind of takes away from the whole experience, which is an album. I mean, like I said, it's a novel. You're not just going to read the first chapter or the third chapter. You got to read the whole thing, man.
100%. And what I love about this record specifically is it's a huge band. I think it's an 8 or 9 piece band on most tracks. Jackie McLean's on this.
Ooh.
I know he's one of your personal favorites. He absolutely crushes it. And there is an element of improvisation on here that's kind of sketched out as you go through the album. I don't know the history of it. Jason and I were talking, you know, through the weekend before the show. I have to start to read more about the timelines on these artists, because I know there's going to be interesting stories in a lot of these recordings. But Mingus Blues and Roots, for me, this is the entry point to Mingus that everybody should come into. This is the way I got into him and became my favorite Mingus album over time. Obviously, so many other greats. The second one, I'm going to show 2 more, but the next one, or the second one, is Black Saint and the Sinner Lady, which you brought up as kind of a high entry point into Mingus. But I'm glad you mentioned his ability to be a storyteller and almost lyrical in his music, even though it's you know, instrumental for the most part. This is almost like a ballet or a musical of sorts that really tells the story of one's life. And if you ever get a chance to read the liner notes on this album, it's pretty remarkable. Mingus has a quote. I don't have it memorized, so I'm going to read it off my notes here. This is my living epitaph from birth to death. From birth to the day I heard Bird and Diz. So he's talking about Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie. So this is kind of his journey through life until he, you know, found those artists, and that's the inspiration for this album. This is one of those albums, like when I spoke about Mal Waldron's The Quest last week. This is one of those albums where you get the imagery and the scenery in your mind. I'm picturing just like a smoky jazz club, maybe in the 30s or 40s, you know, just being exposed to that scene and all the hoopla around it, and maybe the pain and joy that came with, you know, being in those situations. But yes, this is level 2 Mingus from an accessibility standpoint. I agree with you on that, Jason, but this is just a really fun record once you enter the world of Mingus to get into.
I love what you said there too with the visuals, because I'm not kidding when I say his stuff really is kind of like soundtrack music to the time. I mean, I mentioned a film noir kind of film and stuff like that. And those are the images that really kind of go in my head. And it goes back to that storytelling thing, right? His music is so, you said lyrical. I love that. And so visual.
Yeah. And I think like as you get deeper and deeper into Mingus, I think one of the things he doesn't get credit for was his adoption and ability to move with the times in his own style. And it's such a smooth transition through all these different styles of jazz. I think that, you know, even the greats like maybe Train or Miles, they had this, I want to say, deliberate pivot to a new sound. And I think Mingus, being a bit of a traditionalist and a composer at heart, I think he was just able to be a trendsetter and keep the roots of the music and the blues and New Orleans and Afrobeat and things like that, Afro-Cuban beat. I think he was able to keep that in the music, which is an important piece of it. So I kind of feel like he's the bodyguard of the bouncer of the jazz world in a way. Now, speaking of intensity, one thing I should mention is most of Mingus's albums are extremely intense and contentious, in both in sound and in spirit. And this album, this was just reissued as a tone poet, probably 3 years ago, Jason, maybe a little bit longer,
something like that.
There's a lot of history on this record. It's a trio. It's Duke Ellington is, I guess, considered the leader on this, on paper. And then you have Mingus and Max Roach. And there's a lot of conflicting stories about this record, but this album was recorded with a lot of drama and controversy in the studio. I think a lot of ego and temper came about. And what's really cool about this record, Money Jungle, is you can really hear it in the music. You can hear these guys dueling. You can hear some anger. You can hear some intensity. And to me, what's also great about this record is Mingus in a trio, in a small band, is just as boisterous as some of his larger ensembles when he's with 6, 8, 10, 12 people on a really big sound stage. So this was released, I think, originally in 1963 or 64. Could be wrong about that. And yeah, it's just a really great record with three greats of the time. And I think, Max Roach, similar cultural influence that Mingus had. You can really feel it, feel that spirit in the music. So, and yeah, Joey, you're right. He does not look happy on the cover. And, conflicting stories. They had to pull Mingus back in the studio. Ellington had to chase him out. Then there's stories that Max Roach had left the studio. So definitely recommend this record. It's easy to get now that they've reissued it, and it's a really good listen.
I'm glad that you brought that one up, dude. I need to, if I've heard it, it's been a long time ago. So I definitely need to refresh my memory on that one.
Yeah, definitely worth getting into.
Very nice. Very nice. All right. That's it for you on Mingus.
I mean, we could go all night on Mingus, but I think I got to cut myself off at a certain point. Mingus might have to get his own show.
He might have to. It's doing an injustice to cut it off here. But those are some great picks, though, for sure. All right. Well, next guy that we got to talk about is another GOAT by the name of Ron Carter. And I know I'm repeating myself a little bit. We talked about Herbie last week, and I talked about him on this record. But, man, Ron Carter he is such a powerful sound. He's playing as tons of character. He just has all these different kind of styles he can slip into. He's very inventive. He can play with lots of different musicians and really just kind of vibe out. And it's always improvisational and unique and different and fun and always high quality playing. His bass never hides in the background. It's always very front and center. This is no exception. Here we got Ron Carter and, of course, the great Anthony Williams on drums. And they all are leaders here. And they all stand out, even though they're also very well integrated. It's not like, sort of like I kind of compare it I wouldn't compare this Out to Lunch, except that it's stacked with leaders that all know how to play together. It's not like a super group where everyone's trying to steal the spotlight or that each person just solos. It's very much into the compositions. And then kind of that's where I sort of draw the line in terms of the comparison between this and, say, besides the fact that Anthony Williams is also on Out to Lunch. So third plane, we got Herbie, we got Tony. This album splits the compositions kind of between the trio. Carter takes 3 of the 6 tracks on here. They're all fantastic. Herbie and Williams are the perfect sort of complement for Carter. And again, like I said, he really pulls out all the stops on here stylistically, and he kind of goes through his whole bag of tricks, as he often does. A lot of times you can catch him really kind of doing some different things. You'll have one track where it's maybe more straightforward, another track where he's playing like very slow, long notes, another one where he's breaking out the cello. He just does all these different really fun techniques, and this record is no exception. I just think he's one of the most creative bassists going, and this album showcases all of that. There's another one that takes you on a journey. It's another one, and it doesn't get very high ratings from AllMusic, and they're really the only ones that give this like a 2.5 star. Everything else I've seen has given this high marks, and it deserves high marks. This has big Herbie chords. This has big Tony Williams crashes. This has big bass sound from Ron Carter. And again, they do a rendition of Herbie's Dolphin Dance on here, and it is so sensitive and creative. And I mean, it's just essential listening to me. I think it's kind of a hidden gem, really. Third playing, got to check this one out. Fantastic. Ron Carter in his element and surrounded by some great players. Another one where Ron Carter's in his element and surrounded by other great players like Eric Dolphy and Mal Waldron. Here he is on Where. And this is just another phenomenal album for different reasons, a completely different lineup, but just absolutely stellar. We get Dolphy on alto, bass, clarinet, and flute, which we love. We get Mal Waldron on piano doing his thing. And we get a lot of Ron Carter on cello. Like I said before, he is not afraid of the cello. A lot of his work includes cello play, and this one does, and it's fantastic. He'll go from playing a very sort of, I don't want to say typical, but a standard, really accessible kind of hard bop style, and then break into cello. And then with Dolphy, I mean, it's beautiful. And Mal Waldron on the keys, it's just a whole different vibe. In fact, I think to me, Ron Carter really complements Dolphy well. And this isn't to talk about Dolphy, but he's on this album, and they really, really, really play stellar together. Dolphy kind of, to me, always really inspired unconventional playing on for anyone that was in one of his sessions. And I know Dolphy's technically, backing Ron Carter here, but it's a similar thing. He really kind of inspires that playing that's very different and forward thinking. And they all really shine on here. Rowley is a tune on here that's a highlight. But the whole album, again, like all the albums I think we selected, it's just amazing. This is very experimental and fresh today. I mean, you can throw this on the turntable, and I don't think it really sounds dated. I mean, it's so good, it's so unique, it's so individual, and the players are so stellar that it feels as fresh today as ever. There's a track called Bass Duet on here. Yeah, by the way, I didn't mention George Duvivier plays bass on here as well, and he and Carter get into some real nice duets. There's a track literally called Bass Duet on here, where they do a duo, not a solo, a duo, and it's fantastic. And Duvivier actually plays on 4 of the 6 tracks, so you get some really fun kind of interaction between the multi-bass thing going on. It's just groovy, it's fun, it's brilliant. I had to talk about this one with Ron Carter, man. So two of my favorite Ron Carter albums right there, and highly recommended listening, Chris.
Yeah, I just scooped that a couple of weeks ago, and I go through a lot of records, as you do too, and it's hard to play things multiple times, but that stayed on the table for quite a few days. Yeah. I agree, it's a great record, and I love your point about Dolphy. Yeah, and I guess it's also a trend that we've seen on all of the things we've discussed. They're all greats backing other greats, so they're going to bring out the best of those people and kind of shape the session. And that record specifically with the dual bass is really interesting to hear, because it's not something you hear a lot outside of jazz. It's kind of a novelty when you hear it in other musical genres. So I really enjoy that record.
And the great thing is on that too, is it doesn't sound like a novelty. It doesn't sound forced. It doesn't sound like, if you hear that, you might say, why would I want to listen to a track with 2 bass players on it? Believe me, it's not, it's very cohesive. It's very well done, very tastefully done.
Yeah. We had some conflict, I think, and I don't know if we spoke about it in great detail, but I thought that we'd wind up goading either Ron or Mingus, and Mingus gets the upper hand. Not that Ron wasn't a composer, but obviously just a really strong band leader. But, I love that we're doing Ron Carter, because there's nobody that has played with a more diverse group of musicians over time than Ron Carter up until the present day.
You're so
And
right.
the two albums that I picked, to me, are not only accessible to those, you know, coming into the genre and considered classics by those that have been listening to the genre, but I think that they're also seminal albums historically, and I'm going to give some of my reasons why. So the first one I'm going to choose is Herbie Hancock's Imperial Isles, which Ron Carter is on, accompanied by just an all-star band. This could be a fantasy draft band on Wednesday. So yeah, Ron Carter on bass, obviously Herbie on piano, Freddie Hubbard on cornet, and Anthony Williams on drums. I could be wrong about this. Maybe some of the authorities in the chat can correct me if I am, but I'm pretty confident this is the first time Herbie was accompanied by Ron when Herbie was a leader. I think up until this point, he used some other bass players. The standout on here is Cantaloupe Island. I mean, this is a song that even if you've never listened to jazz, you've heard in passing. And this is just a really beautiful record. It closes with The Egg. There's 2 songs on every side, going back to kind of long tracks. I'm a fan of that as well. I like to hear the journey. This is just a smooth, cool record and pretty much essential. Even as a non-jazz fan, this will probably make a lot of people's top albums ever. But I picked this again because there's a special relationship up until present day between Herbie and Ron, not only on the records they played, but if you really follow them in the media, they are 2 of the legends that have really kept the genre alive, and we're fortunate to have them. And they still collaborate with each other. I know that even Ron was on the Joni Mitchell tribute record that Herbie did, and they've played live since together. So this is an essential album.
I think that might be my favorite album of Herbie's as a leader. That album is so good.
Yeah, it's hard to deny it. And you know, I kind of like to find the journey of these artists, and what's great about me picking that album is it kind of plays in and bookends. It kind of plays in a bookends to what you highlighted. You're talking about Herbie and Ron at a totally different era, totally different style, equally as impactful on the record that you chose. So it just goes to show how dynamic he is. Now, this might be for Cesar, because I'm going to bring up a record that's jazz, I guess, but not really jazz, and it kind of highlights Ron Carter's versatility because he's played on a lot of non-traditional jazz records. And that's Gil Scott-Heron's Pieces of a Man.
Ooh, I didn't know you were going to break that out.
Yeah, I told you I was going to have a curveball for you. So socially, this is an incredible record. Obviously, The Revolution Will Not Be Televised is the lead track. Ron is the bass player on this album. I think Bernard Purdy's on drums, and there's a couple of other standout musicians I don't think I have in my notes here. But Gil Scott-Heron, if you're a jazz fan, hip hop fan, socially, you like social conscious music, this is just a seminal, groundbreaking album, seminal, groundbreaking track. And it's just great to see that Ron Carter was on this record. You know, he's also played with Aretha, Ron Carter. He was on a Tribe Called Quest album. He's just been in and out of the jazz world, you know, outside of his traditional catalog. So this is accessible to get now. They've reissued this a bunch of times. You can probably find some copies. You might have to find them a bit beat up because this, you know, came out in the early 70s. But Ron Carter's bass playing on here is just seminal 70s Afrocentric soul music, laid back. It's groove. It's a lot of spoken word for those who've never listened to Gil Scott-Heron. Incredible storyteller, incredible lyricist, and extremely influential. And to your point about Ron Carter being a powerful bass player, you know, he grooves on this whole record, and it's just a standout performance by him. To me, a little bit out of his element. This is just essential. One of the most important records ever recorded. And of course, Ron Carter is on a lot of those. So figured this was a nice curveball to throw you, Jason.
Yeah, that's a great one, dude. I don't have a record. I've been listening to that for a long time, but I've never had a piece of vinyl. So I need to pick one up now that's reissued.
Yeah. So just for the VC guys out there, Flying Dutchman was the original label that Gil Scott-Heron was on. They've been reissuing his stuff quite a bit. out of Europe, all analog, cut beautifully, really good pressings. I have a few others that they've put out, and then Record Store Day has done at least one or two Gil Scott Heron albums. One of the people that was a good friend of mine, unfortunately passed, my friend Dean, he really turned me on to a lot of his stuff and a lot of the stuff I talk about in a lot of these streams. So I always think about him when I hear that record, because he was all about Gil Scott Heron. So
that's cool.
Yeah, it is very cool.
All right, man. Are we ready to go to the next goat? I'm gonna say
now
goat.
Now we get to duel a little bit, right? Those were the two.
This is where I like to. Yeah, we give you guys, we give you guys the sugar, to kind of help the medicine go down. And now's the time where we try to bring out a couple people that maybe, the average person hasn't dove into yet. And so first one, I'm going to talk about my favorite jazz album of all time, Eric Dolphy, Richard Davis. This album, I already talked about another album, but this just where they just turn in a stellar performance as leaders. I mean, this is the one. This is the one where just Dolphy even said, everybody on here, Richard Davis, Anthony Williams, Bobby Hutcherson, Freddie Hubbard, and myself are leaders. And they are, but never has that been more important to how cohesive it is and how just one sound it is, and just how everybody just performs impeccably, including Richard Davis. I also said Dolphy likes to bring out the unusual in people and the unconventional in people, and he does that here. And Richard Davis just goes bananas. You'll hear stuff that's so unconventional. One thing that impresses me most about this record is just how well recorded it is, because it is so unconventional. You have Bobby Hutcherson like hammering on, the side of who knows what, an anvil or something. But you never really get distortion or anything like that. So anyway, Richard Davis is a phenomenal bass player, and I think he kind of goes unsung a little bit, and he played around a lot. Not on a ton of massive records or anything like that. Out to Lunch might be the biggest one, but I'm going to show another one that I think is a fantastic hidden gem. Let me just check my notes here. Yeah, as I said, just kind of always inspiring unconventional playing. This is no exception. Davis playing his top form on here. Also, he's the bass player on the 5-Spot records. With Dolphy and Booker Little. And so those are really great ones to check out as well. The best thing I could say about this is the worst thing I could say about this is that Richard just fits the ensemble perfectly. I really talk about this record as these guys literally exploring different worlds. It sounds like these guys are all at the same exact time, they're all just totally in outer space and totally cohesive. And that's the magic of it, is that somehow with everybody playing unconventionally and in their own way, uniquely, and just everyone's on fire at the top of their game, and yet it all serves the piece. It all serves the piece. And again, Richard Davis, no exception on this. Let's see, before I jump into the other one. Yeah, I do want to mention too that this is kind of an album where what I'll sometimes do, I've listened to it so much, and you can do this with a lot of records that are just packed with a fantastic ensemble, is just listen to Richard Davis. Put this thing on and just focus on his playing, and you'll be so rewarded. Just listen to Bobby Hutcherson and you'll be super rewarded. Just listen to Tony Williams or Freddie. It just goes back to what I mean about, like, in isolation, they're all fantastic. Put them all together, the whole is way greater than some of the parts. Anyway, Richard Davis. This is probably my introduction to Richard Davis's music right there on Out to Lunch. But another one that I love that I just think is kind of a sleeper, and I know this has been reissued and stuff, but Heavy Sounds. And this is Elvin Jones on drums and Richard Davis on bass. Yeah. This is, to me, an underrated masterpiece, man. Frank Foster is on tenor. Billy Green is on piano. Everybody, again, this is another where they just serve the purpose of this album, man. It just comes out so much greater than its parts, even though the parts are fantastic. Everyone is just groovy on here. Everyone is, it's a bluesy mood, a bluesy session. Davis, for the most part, is going to be more accessible on here than Out to Lunch. So this might be a better entry point. If you're just kind of dipping your toe into the avant-garde, this might be a great place to start with his work. Again, bluesy. It's rocking. There's a track on here that called Elvin's Guitar Blues, which is even more so than like a lot of jazz has blues elements. A lot of jazz are literally blues, just done with jazz instruments. That's the bluesiest jazz track I've ever heard. Elvin's Guitar Blues. It's very, very good, very bluesy. Again, there's Richard Davis plays cello, and this just like Ron Carter, and you get some cello on here too. And so that's why I love those guys. They're so diverse. This is a guy you probably don't hear near as much as you hear about Ron Carter, but is just as diverse and just as capable. I say just as. I don't know. It's hard to top Ron Carter, but I mean, he's a guy that really needs his propers, man. He's very, very good. Elvin is an animal on this album. I mean, you can listen for Elvin on here as always, in his polyrhythmic way. And there's a lot of instrumentation on here, and yet Richard Davis is still front and center. He's another guy. I guess I compare him again, like Carter. They do not take a backseat to anyone. They come forward, but because they're so unique, they have so much to add, if that makes sense, right? If they were playing very like standard and typical and just kind of supporting a band and they were out front, it might sound a little off, but they don't play that way. They play very unique. And they play just as important. Their playing is important as an individual as any other instrument on here. Whew, okay. I'm going to take a break, man. This is just fantastic. Well, check out Heavy Sounds.
So there's two really cool things about Richard Davis that I love. Number one, I love Andrew Hill. I don't know if you listen to Andrew Hill.
Oh yeah.
And that's another kind of obtuse jazz musician. Kind of could be difficult for some people to listen to. But he is, I think he's for a majority of Andrew Hill's albums, at least in his prime. He's the bass player there. Also, he's the bass player on Van Morrison's Astral Weeks. Did you know that?
I did not know that.
Yeah, dude. And when you go back and listen to that record, it makes sense. It's a really
if I'm
cool...
being honest, like I have a long Richard Davis, as much as I love him and as much as I bring him up and as fantastic as he is, I feel it's kind of like when you're just entering into something new in a lot of ways, because I didn't give him a lot of attention, but now that I know, I'm thinking about it honestly for this episode and refreshing my memory and how great he is. I'm very happy. What do I say? It's like, it's when you get to explore something for the very first time. And now I know I have this big catalog of his stuff that I get to kind of start exploring, and you're hipping me to some good ones, man.
Well, that's the thing. This has been kind of present since I'm a kid listening to this stuff, not in the way I listen to it now and not the volume of it, but going back and hearing the most common jazz record now is like a totally different experience based upon what you've been exposed to, what mind state you're in, all the music you listen to. So what I love about a lot of the choices you make is that it is rediscoverable music. Listening to Out to Lunch, you have to go back. Once you start to understand where it's coming from, you have to go back and just focus on certain pieces of that record, certain instruments on that record, because it is a whole new listening experience. I totally agree with that advice. And I've done it on all types of music, but jazz is the easiest for me to go back and do that on, because you don't always know when you first get exposed, like how good Elvin Jones was until you hear a lot of Elvin Jones. Then you're like, oh, let me go back to this album and re-listen to it. You're like, oh, wow. That's a unique take on what he's doing, or you start to pick up the styles he makes. So I think that's a really cool perspective. But yeah, I think you made a really good pick on that. He needs to be exposed. He deserves the credit because he's on a lot of seminal records.
Yep. Not absolutely.
So
and I love what you said too, just quickly, that you mentioned,
yeah.
Like I was saying, and you kind of doubled down, which is going back and re-listening to things and discovering things. Jazz is one of those kinds of music. It's in all music, right? It's difficult on like a few listens to pick up everything, especially on Out to Lunch. And you might be exposed to artists all the time that you just haven't like consciously been, and he's one of them. He's just someone that I haven't consciously come into my zeitgeist, even though he's been in the periphery all the time. And so being able to just say, you know what, I'm going to go explore this. It's just a whole different kind of reward.
Yeah, it's that's the beauty of this music, is that we're fortunate to a certain extent that the greatest part of it is finite, right? That it's reserved in a specific run of time, and there is an unfortunate part to it that it's not as popular as it was, or the music isn't as prolific as the classics. But it just allows this endless world of exploration, to go back and re-listen to these records, and you learn the styles of people. And sometimes I get to a point where I'm like, oh, I know it's that musician when I hear the first note. And it's kind of rewarding, So
Yeah, I got to call out Caesar here real quick. He just says, have you played it at 45 RPM? I've done it without knowing, and I didn't even know I was playing it at the wrong speed. It sounded great on 45 RPM. Man, some records are like that, dude. I've done that before where I'd have it going at the wrong speed, and it's kind of funny. It's kind of embarrassing, but I'm kind of like, oh, this is cool. If I something I haven't heard before, and then if it doesn't have vocals, and you're not always gonna know, So anyway, that's kind of funny.
That's great. So the next two guys I chose, kind of staying with the theme of Ron Carter, I think that I'm not a musician, so I don't know who's better, who's worse. I just look at what they've touched in history. And when you run down the next guy I'm going to bring up, it is absolutely insane in a short amount of time who he played with, what he played on, and he died really young. And I even really going through his discography, I don't think he recorded much towards the end of his life. And the guy I'm going to talk about is Paul Chambers. To me, when we talk about all these greats playing together, I think you look at a guy like Paul Chambers, and he wasn't really, maybe he was, but you don't really hear him as kind of like the essential jazz artist that you should be listening to. You come to learn he's essential. You come to learn he's iconic. And I'm going to show two albums at once, because if I had to give somebody a jazz starter pack, these would be 2 out of the 5 albums that everybody should own. One of them, in my opinion, is the greatest album ever recorded. And Paul Chambers was the bass player on Miles Davis's Kind of Blue, which is for me my favorite album and the greatest album ever. And John Coltrane's Blue Train.
Wow. Heavy hitters.
These are heavy hitters, but let's go through some of the history with Paul Chambers. He plays with Coltrane from 57 to 61. Those are pretty much the prestige years leading up into Blue Train. He plays with Miles on several of his classic albums. I have some notes here just going back. He's playing with both Adderley brothers early on in his career. He's playing with Pepper Adams. He's on some Riverside Chet Baker stuff. He's on some early Kenny Burrell stuff. I mean, this guy from basically, I would say like 1955, 1956 to 1961 was the go-to bass players for so many people. I mean, Miles took him from Prestige in 1956 all the way up to Quiet Nights on Columbia in 1962. So in between there, you have Kind of Blue, Sketches of Spain, Steamin', Relax, and Miles Ahead. I mean, he's also on Kenny Durham's Quiet Kenny. I mean, he is on so many classic jazz records. It's absolutely absurd. Yeah. So for me, when you talk about, best bass players, I don't know if he was innovative. I don't know if he had a style to me that was better or more influential than anybody else. But when you are the go-to bass player on so many seminal albums, in my opinion, the golden age of jazz in that 1955 to 1965 range, it's really hard to ignore him. And I wanted to pick like 8 records he's a sideman on, and of course he has, he has records as a leader as well, which are awesome. But to me, Paul Chambers is the glue that held a lot of superstars bands together, and I just can't say enough about him. So Kind of Blue, obviously, Blue Train, but go back to any of that early Miles and Coltrane catalog in those years, he's the guy. Yeah. Which got me thinking, I know Ron Carter is exceptional, but I think if you look at the discographies and kind of how they played out, I feel like and this is no knock on Ron Carter, and I don't know this to be true, just an observation, I feel like as Paul was maybe falling out of favor for whatever reason, behavior, illness, whatever the case may be, that's where you see Ron Carter really skyrocket. So it's kind of sad to see that those guys didn't exist a lot longer together, and what kind of impact they would have had, and who knows who would have played on what records at that point. But I'm going to read more about that because I feel like there's some correlation there between the sessions that those guys were or weren't on based upon Paul kind of, getting sick and passing early. So Paul Chambers is my pick there.
That's huge. That's huge. You're right, and a lot of great stuff as a leader, but just as a side man, just slaying. And on a lot of important records, like you said. All right, my next guy, as we go, I think this will be the last bass. Is this the last? Yeah, last bass player for me and we'll jump into guitar players. And I got to I go old school on these, and this is another one. I'm going to go old school a couple different times, and I got to shout out Ray Brown. And part of it is, I had a chance in the Bay Area. They did a birthday celebration in October for him every year. For a while. I don't know if they're still doing it, but I had a chance to go to a couple different ones, and it's all people that played with Ray Brown and stuff like that. And of course, he'd already passed, but just got kind of Ray Brown in my blood a little bit doing that. He appears on a lot of early stuff. A lot of people will know him potentially with Oscar Peterson, Ella Fitzgerald. He was a founding member of the group that turned into the Modern Jazz Quartet. And so Groovin' High is the record I'm holding right here, Dizzy Gillespie. Now, the thing about these early ones I'm showing is that often these are records that were assembled from 78 RPMs or 10-inch, and so they're all going to be, the two I'm going to show are compilations, and they will have a variety of sidemen on these. So it's not like this is going to be all Ray Brown. You get a sprinkling of Ray Brown, but he did perform on some important Dizzy records. And in fact, there's a great movie that has a lot of inserted into it is a lot of almost like music videos from the 40s. And there's one of a Dizzy, I think it's Oop Bop Shabam, or He Beeped When He Should Have Bopped. It's one of those. And you see a young Ray Brown who started very young in the band. And it's very, very cool. It's very cool. So he did a lot of work with Dizzy. He did a lot of work with this next person I'm going to mention. He was sort of known as a early master of sort of like, walking the bass line, right? Going up and down the neck on the bass and playing what really became kind of the standard way to play for a long time. He'd throw little flourishes in there. He does it in that video that I'm talking about that are just really fun. Dizzy gives him some space to kind of stand out. Not a full-blown solo, but just these little, nooks and crannies of stuff that are fun. And again, I think Dizzy really liked to just kind of feature him in his bands. Again, on this one, he just has a few different tracks on Groovin' High, but, I'm trying to remember which one. I think Ray's Idea is one, and there's a couple of other ones that are worth seeking out. And the next one I want to show is with Ray Brown. Again, a similar deal. This is Basie's Jazz, an early Basie, again, compilation on Clef Records, which came out in the early 50s, I think. And again, this is going to be assembled from those 78s. And Ray Brown doesn't appear on every track, but he appears on a bunch of these. And what else did I want to say about these? Yeah, like I said, it's just a lot of different lineups and stuff. And so these were recorded in 1952, released in 1954. And, I just think Ray Brown is just one of those early jazz guys like Basie, like Dizzy, like Bird, that just really kind of developed a style during that era when there wasn't a lot of diversity necessarily. We came to know diversity like with bebop and then hard bop and post bop and fusion and everything went crazy. But back in the day, it was, for guys to stand out, it maybe seems common now. Sometimes it's difficult to go back and see kind of like, well, what's the big deal with Ray Brown? Like, we have Ron Carter and we have all these other things, Charles Mingus and Paul Chambers. But at the time, he was really standing out and was just reliable and just played with a lot of great bands. And so I got to call out Ray Brown, man. He's one of the OGs and he influenced so many. He's in the lineage of bass players that all those guys that we know and love came out of. And so he really helped inspire all those guys. So yeah, I had to give him some love today. So Ray Brown is my last bass player today, Chris.
Yeah, Ray Brown he actually, his career extended into the 70s and 80s quite a bit too. I think he did
Yeah.
a decent amount of recording. I know he even played on a Steely Dan record, Countdown to Ecstasy. I think it's only on one song.
That's a good point. He played with a lot of outside of jazz. He played on a lot of records. Yeah.
Yeah, and I love that. I like to bring that up for the crew that tunes in as well, because these, jazz is one style of music, but it's really the root of a lot of American music. And a lot of these guys do get out of that jazz world and go play rock acts, R&B acts, things like that. And it's really cool to kind of see that transition. So,
Yeah.
well, I know we want to get to guitar, but I have one more bass player who also was a really essential piece of an important movement in jazz. And I'm going to highlight Jimmy Garrison, who played with Coltrane from, I think, 61 to 66. And playing with Coltrane at that time was a chore, I think, for a lot of people. I don't think Coltrane was a bad guy, but he was off his rocker as far as musical expression. And he did have some albums that are very accessible. I'm going to talk about one. The first one I'm going to talk about is Ballads, which is if you're an audiophile, if you just like music that sounds amazing from a recording perspective, this is one of the best sounding albums ever recorded. All-star lineup, another fantasy jazz, lineup here. Coltrane with McCoy Tyner, Jimmy Garrison, and Elvin Jones. They're all ballads. It's a sentimental record. It's an emotional record. It's a record that you could put on if you have a dinner party, you have people over, you need kind of, I hate to say background music, but music that's inviting. And this is just one of the most beautifully recorded albums ever. And another one that I put in the jazz starter pack for people. And Jimmy Garrison plays a key part in this record. Really sets the mood with some really beautiful bass lines, really complements, Coltrane on his playing, driving rhythm section with Elvin Jones, even on slower tunes. So Ballads is just an incredible album.
Yeah.
And I vowed I wouldn't do this early on in our conversations to not mention the unaccessible to a lot of the people in our audience, but it's also an amazing feat that Jimmy Garrison played on A Love Supreme. And this is, I don't like to call this an avant-garde record. I think this is a spiritual record. I think it's a record that is, Coltrane describes it as his conversation or his profession to God, and it sounds like that. The scary part about this album, why I give all the musicians on it a lot of credit, including Jimmy Garrison, is Coltrane is playing light years ahead of even the best musicians in his group at this point. And you can hear, even though it's a beautifully composed album, that it's hard to keep up with Coltrane in this era. He was on a mission. He isolated himself and wrote this record and gave the parts and the pieces to his group. And Garrison does yeoman's work on keeping up with him, playing along with McCoy Tyner at furious speeds on this album, really keeping a groove. Love Supreme is not where I would start to get introduced to Jimmy Garrison or John Coltrane, but I think one day you'll have to get there. Every publication you read is going to rank this as one of the best jazz records ever. And if you really focus in and listen to it a bunch of times, as you start to really understand where Coltrane's coming from, you really see Jimmy Garrison shine in a lot of the grooves he plays. But I just think it's hard to talk about most important or best bass players and leave out Garrison and Chambers, because their fingerprint is just on so many seminal periods of jazz, and in my favorite era, in that maybe decade and a half where they existed, and were frontline and center on some pretty important recordings. So I'm close out my bass list with Jimmy Garrison.
That's a good call. I'm glad you brought those guys up, because sometimes I go a little I don't know, deeper into some of these things where they're a little less accessible in terms of, and some of their work is kind of hidden. And the guitars, I'm going to do the same thing on one of these guys, but I feel like they bear mentioning. But I love that you bring out these guys that just play on these super important records, man. They just have to be, they cannot go unmentioned. So that's a good one.
For me, like, you and I are both big music fans, obviously. And we always kind of focus on the headliner. And just not talking about jazz. Jimmy, Prince, Jerry, all these guys we know by first names, but everybody fails to recognize that some of the most important pieces of what they were doing was the guys that were supporting them. And without those guys, that music doesn't come about, no matter who wrote the music or how they were playing. Like, you need that important glue, and especially a bass player and drummer. If you're not driving the rhythm section, your whole world's going to fall apart. So
Yeah.
I'm glad we highlighted those guys.
Yep, for sure. All right, man. Oh man, you know what I have not been doing? I said I was going to do this. I knew, like, I'm trying to multitask and do 3 different things. I failed on my whole keeping track of all the bass players. There we go. All right, we're going to do that for guitars. I'm going to see how far I can go. Maybe you can keep an eye on comments, and I'll watch these. So
yeah, I can't highlight the comments. I don't know what's going on.
Oh, really? Okay. I'll go back and forth.
It's all good.
All right, so there he is. There he is right there. We're going to jump into guitar players. And of course, again, we got to start with the GOAT, man. We got to ease into it with some easy listening. Grant Green, idle moments right there. Joe Henderson, Duke Pearson, Bobby Hutcherson is on this one. Of course, I love Bobby Hutcherson on the vibes. This was released in 1965 on Blue Note. Having a vibraphone on here really helps to set the mood. It's amazing. That's the thing about Bobby Hutcherson, man, is that yes, he can solo. Yes, he's one of the great composers in jazz, in my opinion, but he can play as a sideman and just really set the mood. If you extract his vibes from it, you have a completely different thing. And so having him on this really helps to, next time you listen to Idle Moments, man, listen for Bobby, because he definitely helps to set the tone on this one. Another interesting thing about this is that we get piano and vibes. And oftentimes we don't get that, and even when Out to Lunch, when it was put together, Dolphy makes the comment that he preferred Bobby Hutcherson's vibes on that record because it was so open and gave more freedom, he felt, to some of the other players. In this case, we have both, and it's a great song. I mean, a great way to go, and kind of reminiscent to George Shearing. It reminds me of him. He did a lot of stuff. His combos would have, obviously, George Shearing, piano player, but he would have vibraphonists on his records as well, and it really creates a unique sound. This kind of takes it to another level, but it kind of is still kind of reminiscent of that. Grant Green, the star of the show, of course, very bluesy. The thing about Grant Green that I reminded myself of when I spun this earlier is just how impeccable his tone is, how well recorded he was, and just how every note is perfect. Every note has purpose, and not every guitar player is like that. I'm going to get into some other guitar players that are a little more not as refined. Grant Green is refined. I mean, to the 10th degree, man. He's just super, super perfectionist, in my opinion, on guitar and bluesy and again, it's the tone. He really stands out. When you hear him, you know it's him, and it's always super clean. And this record's no exception. Clarity of tone. Let's see. This one is so well recorded, man. It's as if Grant Green is just kind of sitting across from you in the room. I know we talk about that on some of these like audiophile recordings, and this one is no exception, man. It's just like he's right there in the room with you playing, and it's just so good. This Idle Moments, the track is a long 15-minute tune. That one was actually composed by Duke Pearson. And it is a super fantastic, I call it a slow jam. It's so cool, man. It's bluesy, it's chill, it's just vibes. It's just a great way to open this record up. In fact, Green's only composition on here is a more hard bopping tune called Jean de Fleur. I guess that's French. And it is a swinging tune. It is a whole different deal. There's another composition I guess he did for these sessions that you can hear if you get the CD or if you listen on Spotify. But on the album, the vinyl, you only get that one track. So just to kind of circle back, I mean, the guitar, the piano, the vibes on here, it's such a great kind of unique combo, and yet they just pull it off in spades. It's so freaking good. Idle Moments is very satisfying on here. It's a fantastic essential album. Probably my favorite Grant Green album, if I had to be honest. All the personnel are in top form, like I said, and it's just so well recorded, man. Unlike a lot of the guys I'm going to mention, just the only thing I can say about Grant Green, if you haven't heard him in a while, or if you haven't heard him at all, is just he's just so clean. Every note is perfect. The tone is perfect. And that's what you're going to get here. So if you like that kind of thing, man, this is the one to go to, in my opinion, man. Idle Moments.
Well,
Chris.
I'm not even gonna do Grant Green because you took everything I wanted to say about him. No, I'm just kidding. So I have a very strange relationship to jazz guitar. It didn't click with me for a long time. I mean, some stuff would. I just didn't dig it. But I picked Grant Green as kind of the GOAT because he's the guy that really reversed my head a little bit about, how jazz guitar can be really great. And I picked 2 albums, I think, of distinct styles that I want to talk about. I was absolutely going to pick Idle Moments, but the one I chose was actually Grant Green, Green Street here. For 2 reasons. Number one, this is a trio album. It's got Ben Tucker on bass and Dave Bailey on drums. I love Grant Green in a trio because his tone is so excellent. Every note is absolutely perfectly placed. He does not overplay. There's a texture to his playing that kind of fills the room. It's warm but precise, and I absolutely love his cover of Roundabout Midnight on here. One of those standards out of the Monk catalog that just absolutely blows my mind. So this is a stark contrast, I think, in a lot of ways to the next album I'm going to choose, and I chose Larry Young's Into Something, which Grant Green is on. Now, it took me a long time to embrace this style of jazz guitar, but one of the things I really recognize is that I love when they bring the funk. So I love to hear Grant Green accompany an organ because there's a groove that gets established. You hear it on a lot of records that Grant Green's a side person on, and he's played with Jimmy Smith. I think he's on a Lee Morgan album with some organ. There's a bunch of other artists he's played with, but what really kind of broke down the door for me with jazz guitar was kind of hearing him duel with an organ player a little bit. And this is a fun record. And the cool thing about Grant Green is that I feel like if Grant Green came out today, it would be just as fresh as it was when it came out. If you like funky music, soul music, R&B music, R&B with a rock twist, you like lyrical playing, you like melody, I mean, Grant Green's your guy, and that's why I crowned him the GOAT as well as you, Jason. So thank you, Grant Green, for breaking me down and getting me into jazz guitar, because if it wasn't for you, I'd be able to talk about these next guys that I'm going to bring up.
I really love that you bring Larry Young into the mix too, because, and that's might be another one we have to do, organist, man, because a lot of people, I think the average person is going to know Jimmy Smith, and Jimmy Smith slays. There's no doubt about it. I mean, he's fantastic. But then we forget about some of these other guys like Larry Young, that's in his own way is phenomenal. So I'm glad you're bringing him into this.
Definitely.
All right. Ready for the next one?
Yes, sir.
All right. Next guy I did is a guy who I wasn't familiar with until very recently. But then once I started to get into his stuff, I was like, oh, wow, okay, I got to check out more of this. And we're talking about Barney Kessel. And this one's Feeling Free right here. And so I sort of... And this may not be accurate. Like I said, I do not have a long relationship with Barney Kessel, but when I sort of think about him, I sort of think of like he's kind of the Vince Guaraldi of guitar. Vince Guaraldi, of course, people know of the piano player and composer of the Peanuts music and stuff like that. He just does so much, and it just always sounds like he's having a ton of fun, and it's a little different. And when I said that as like polished as Grant Green is kind of as loose as Barney Kessel is. I just love his, it almost feels like more rock and roll in a way. He always, again, he just always sounds like he's having tons of fun, and it's not about sitting there and just hitting every note perfectly. It's very much about creating a vibe. And I swear I did not pull this out because Bobby Hutcherson performs on here as well, but Bobby Hutcherson performs on here as well. And again, it's fantastic. And the thing about Bobby, man, is that, and again, not talking about Bobby today, but it's just, he is so freaking diverse that he can accompany so many different styles of music and just pull it off, because he just, he's not like, well, when we want this kind of vibraphone, we select Bobby. It's always like when we need a vibe, and I mean vibe in both ways. Let's get Bobby in here, because he knows exactly what to do. And this one does omit a piano, and so you just have Bobby. And that's the thing I love about this too, I have to say, is that it does give Bobby a little more freedom to kind of open up. Whereas on Idle Moments, he's a little bit more contained because the piano's there. Not the case on this one. Elvin Jones is on here as well on drums, which is phenomenal. He holds down the drums. This is just a smooth swinging session. Let's see. I mean, yeah, it's just some of it. It kind of delves a little bit into the avant-garde, but not much. It's very much kind of, I don't know. It's very accessible. It's not going to be the polish you get from a Grant Green, but Barney Kessel is a very, very fun guitar player with his own style. Like I said, just a little bit less refined, which is not taking anything away. It's just, that's his style. Yeah, it's just in a very, very good way. So yeah, there you go, a Barney Kessel. And I could have picked a bunch of different ones. This is just kind of the one I landed on, but you get Bobby Hutcherson on here, you get Elvin Jones on here, you could do a lot worse than Feeling Free, Barney Kessel.
Jason, I think we need to put a poll out there to the audience sooner or later.
Yeah.
Does Jason love Bobby Hutcherson more than Chris loves fish? I mean, that's a really difficult question.
Ooh,
to settle on. That's a showdown.
I'm gonna have to figure out a game just for that.
So got to update the banners too down below, because
I
want to really highlight for Caesar that I've heard him loud and clear, and I have a special surprise for him. My next pick is Kenny Burrell. You cannot talk about jazz guitar without talking about Kenny Burrell. Similar to Grant Green, a little more bluesy than funky, in my opinion. Certainly evokes that assassin-like mentality with not overplaying notes. The record that I'm going to show, one of the records I'm going to show for Kenny Burrell is Bluesy Burrell. And I also think, big on like history and kind of the inside baseball stuff. I'm pretty sure this is the last prestige session for Coleman Hawkins. And when I learned about that, which I hope is accurate, you can really hear the interplay between the two, almost like you knew it was over type of thing. They were kind of letting it all hang out, and Burrell and Coleman really just I don't want to say duel, but they really play off each other really nicely on this record. Tommy Flanagan's on piano, Eddie Locke on drums, some congos on this record. So this has got a bunch of different styles of music on it, which I really enjoy. Also an audiophile recording. I remember when this got reissued, my brother-in-law and I both got this around the same time, and it was like simultaneous. Like, this is one of the best recordings I've ever heard. Like, this is just an amazing record. I also want to bring up another thing about Kenny Burrell, especially in the jazz world. I am appalled at the hate that the Bethlehem catalog gets at times and how it's kind of overlooked. But this is a really cool album that Kenny Burrell's on. He's not on the first track. The first track is just Stardust. That doesn't include him. But think about this lineup here: Kenny Burrell, Donald Byrd, Pepper Adams, Tommy Flanagan, Paul Chambers on bass, and Hay Lewis on drums. This is just a fun, accessible early record. The Bethlehem catalog is sorely underappreciated, I think. I think it deserves a nice reissue campaign. But yeah, Kenny Burrell shines on this record as well. And this is also one of the coolest album covers ever. Just a race car driver with all those great names on street signs.
I know, I was going to mention that, dude. I love that.
Yeah, Kenny and Grant. I mean, it's like Jordan and LeBron or Magic and Bird. However you want to think about it, could have been easily number one on our list. So I hope Cesar's happy with that one.
There you go, Cesar. And who knows, man? Maybe we might actually go to another one of your call outs. I'm not saying we are. I'm not saying we're not. All right. Can I go old school again, Chris? Oh, I'm so sorry.
You gotta go old school because I'm gonna go very new school eventually. So
all right,
balance it out.
I'm gonna go not very, but I'll go a little new school. I'm so sorry. Reactive dog in the house. Somebody walks by and she has to protect us. All right, so next guy for me, and I'll try to go quick if my dog's gonna keep barking. But Charlie Christian. Again, like I said, we are going old school here. The thing about Charlie Christian, he was not recorded prolifically. He doesn't have a lot of recordings, and you can get Solo Flight, which I'm holding right here, very affordably, and it will cover much of his catalog. You can also find his stuff, obviously stream it, and you can get the entire catalog that way. He died of tuberculosis, 25 years old, and it's unfortunate. This 2LB set, as I said, contains a lot of his best work, oftentimes performing with Benny Goodman bands. We're going back to like late 30s, early 40s with him. And we're talking pre-World War II. And again, this is a guy who dies at 25 and still manages to influence the entire guitar player lineage, from 1939 until the present. I mean, he was a big influence on Grant Green. When you look up Grant Green, one of the first names you'll see is you're going to see Charlie Christian's name pop up there. And Grant Green had a lot of influences, but it kind of starts here, man. He's just a bluesy guitar player, a jazzy guitar player, and so he really influenced both of those genres massively. Guys like T-Bone Walker, B.B. King are going to credit Christian. Jimi Hendrix and Eric Clapton are going to credit Christian. And this is basically the document for that. I mean, this is the stuff that you're going to be able to kind of connect the dots if you're someone like I was that wanted to kind of chase that lineage back. And finally, kind of, in a way, it kind of ends here. I mean, Charlie Christian was just such a massive influence and such a unique player. Very unfortunate that he died young, like a lot of great players. So yeah, I guess I would recommend that you can pick this up. It's fun to hear it on vinyl, but of course you can pick up, or you can listen to him on Spotify or Apple Music or whatnot and kind of judge for yourself. But yeah, this is a nice little double LP here. Again, super affordable and just covers a lot of his catalog and his influence right here on 2 records. Again, oftentimes with Benny Goodman's bands. So Charlie Christian, had to call him out.
Jason, while you change the banner to Charlie Christian, I do have a question for you.
Okay.
No.
No, not a question. No, I'm just kidding.
Is Charlie Christian evidence that it's better to burn out than fade away? That's the question.
Ooh, gosh. I don't know, man. That's kind of harsh. This is a comp artist. This is someone you're going to get like an anthology of greatest hits of, because I've listened to his stuff, but I've never really looked for any albums. I don't know if he had albums. I've always seen like, here's the essential Charlie Christian. Yeah,
Django's kind of like that.
Yeah. He'll appear in other people's stuff. So you might find him again. If you go buy a Benny Goodman record, he might be somewhere in there, depending on the era, if you're getting between 39 and 41. But this is kind of a great way where it kind of collects really his best stuff. Some of these guys, I guess with most people, they don't have to be, you don't need a comprehensive list of everything. I think 2 LPs is fine considering how little he really was recorded. And so I think it's pretty highly regarded that that's the one to get. Solo Flight, right? Yeah, Solo Flight's a good one.
Cool. So I'm going to go complete opposite end of the spectrum from a timeline. I'm going to talk about a guy who I guess probably came of age in the 70s and got really popular in the 80s. Played with Miles, played with Billy Cobham, had his own solo stuff. Played with another guitarist that might be mentioned, but I'm going to talk about John Scofield, which to me, Scofield, one of the greatest, modern guitar players ever. I consider modern, 75 and on. I'm going to highlight a record that's within the past 20, 25 years. This is an album called A Go-Go. Disclaimer, I don't recommend buying this album on vinyl because the pressing is terrible. It's okay to just get a CD of this or stream it. This album is insane, though. This is an album that I got turned on into high school, listened, and been listening to ever since. It's when it came out. It was in the late 90s. He's accompanied by Medeski, Martin, and Wood, which is this heady, funky jazz trio out of New York that really came to be in the 90s. They were definitely on Blue Note. Was fortunate enough to see them live a bunch of times, never with Schofield. But this is a killer album. It starts off with a go-go and shank, like two definitive tracks for John Schofield. The opening guitar licks are so on point, so funky. The album simmers out quite a bit and gets into some really nice playing with some nice rhythms created by the trio as you go into the end of side 1 into side 2. But this is one of the downright dirtiest, headiest, funkiest records that you could hear, and Schofield is just a wizard on it. I also really have a fondness for Schofield because he's done some work with Government Mule, which I'm not a massive fan on, but he's also played in some of the reincarnations of the Dead, especially with Phil Lesh. Rest in peace, Phil Lesh. But Schofield was a part of Phil Lesh's band in a lot of different lineups, and to hear him play some of Jerry Garcia's stuff and kind of his take on Jerry Garcia's stuff is really fantastic. And also to hear him play some of the rhythms that Bob Weir used to play or still plays is really incredible. And he adds that jazz sense that the Grateful Dead has, and he really brings that out in the music and brings a lot of funk and a lot of texture to it as well. So to me, Schofield played with so many artists, so many different styles of music. It's hard to ignore his impact. He's definitely a jazz guitarist, but one of these guys that is really a chameleon. You know, he gets in where he can, and then he makes it his own. And you know it's Scof from the moment he hits the strings. So, you know, once again, John Schofield, the Go-Go. Everybody should go at least stream the first 2 tracks on this record because it'll just melt your face. It's just incredible stuff.
Yeah, I got to check that one out, man. I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah, it's funny because my guy's a little more contemporary as well. Are you done, by the way, before I jump in on this?
I'm done with Schofield, but I have a comment on your next guy, I'm sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Don't ask any hard questions.
I won't.
All right. My next guy, Pat Metheny. And this is another guy that, you know, only in the last couple of years have I really been kind of diving into the ECM catalog of Pat Metheny. This is the first Pat Metheny group record. Lyle Mays, Mark Egan, Don Gottlieb. This is from 1978. This is just a record that I was playing it today, man. And it's a record that I feel very okay with and confident in saying it's just a wonderful album with beautiful compositions, mostly by Metheny and Mays. It's just phenomenal. I mean, Pat Metheny is a very unusual guitar player, and especially on this, I mean, when you hear his stuff, it's, unusual is the way to say it. It's just interesting. He played a 6-string, he played a 12-string. He also played a guitar synthesizer, famously, and I think one of the early jazz musicians to adopt one of those, and to fantastic effect. This record opens up with a song called San Lorenzo. It is so freaking good, dude. It is so, so good. And again, I mean, a lot of his work is going to be very complex, but also very sensitive, very unique and fusion. But, you know, like Bobby Hutcherson and the stuff that's kind of more fusion-esque, it's just very sensitive and beautiful also, which is, to me, like a great combination. Everyone is locked in on this album. Mark Egan, who is a student of Jaco Pastorius, by the way, is fantastic here. Lyle May's piano is beautiful and a standout. In fact, to me, Lyle May's piano playing on here almost steals the show. It really is kind of leads all of the music on here. But again, it's such a great ensemble. It's not, I don't say that to mean like anyone is slipping. They're not. It's just that the piano is so freaking great on here. And Pat Metheny gives everyone space. You know, this isn't like the Pat Metheny show. Like he comes in when he needs to. It's just fire every single time. Um, let's see. He was inspired by Miles Davis early on, like a lot of musicians, obviously. He also he won a scholarship from Downbeat magazine, which I thought was interesting. So he has an interesting story. Again, I mentioned the variety of guitars that he plays. And when he plays the guitar synthesizer too, it's and purposely meant to sound kind of like a trumpet, and he plays it a lot like a trumpet. So it's just a very unique thing to kind of hear that sound coming out of his guitar. And it's funny that you talked about Grateful Dead roots with your last bass player. I almost think, since we got some Deadheads in the house, you know, not the least of which is you and I, Chris, if you like Grateful Dead, check out Pat Metheny, man. His stuff is very kind of... He and Jerry have a kinship somehow. You know, I think Pat Metheny will go out and kind of do something, but then he'll kind of get into this little... You'll think... You will make the connection between him and Jerry on occasion and on this album. And so I just was really thinking about you when I heard that. I was kind of like, that's really cool, man, because they're the Dead. And I don't even want to open a can of worms. We're going to get into the Grateful Dead in a future video, but if you like the Dead, this would be a good album to kind of maybe start out with and ease yourself in, because I do see some like spiritual kind of connection between Jerry and Pat Metheny. So they have very similar sensibilities, I think. So there you go. Pat Metheny Group debut, phenomenal, sensitive, just really great album.
Well, I got to apologize to you because I dropped the ball a little bit here, but there's a Pat Metheny Schofield album that was reissued as a Tone Poet a couple of years ago. I think it's called I Can See Your House From Here. And it's the two of them together, which is a phenomenal record.
Okay. Yeah, very cool.
Yeah. If you haven't heard it, I would check it out. So that was just my comment on Metheny. I agree. Metheny and Jerry, they're same church, different pew. You know what I mean? Like they definitely have some resemblance to one another. That's a really cool observation. So, all right, my last, and this is important for me to close with this guy. Arguably could have been the GOAT. One of the best jazz guitarists ever, and that's going to be Trey Anastasio from Fish. I'm just kidding.
I took you just at face value, man. I'm like, okay.
The last guy I'm going to talk about, and I had to choose this player because he is one of the greats. He's very influential, and I think he has an interesting story. But I also by choosing this guy, I could choose a specific album that kind of kills two birds with one stone. And, you know, I think might have to let Cesar do my spots from now on, because I did pick Joe Pass as one of the great jazz guitar players ever.
Gotta Tone Poet too. I think you already said that, but yeah, Gotta Tone Poet early is very nice.
Yeah, just a classy, deliberate, melodic player. I feel a lot of guitar players I hear talk about their favorite guitar players always name Joe Pass. I feel like a lot of musician friends of mine that play guitar always bring up Joe Pass. From what I know about Joe Pass, I think he had some legal troubles in the 50s. I think he was in the services in the 40s, or played in the services. He kind of stumbled around the country, played a lot in New Orleans and maybe in one other scene, and he got caught up in some nonsense that kind of curtailed his life a little bit. He came back strong in the 50s. Now he got signed to Pacific Jazz, and then he goes on in the 60s to record with them, and then he goes onto the Pablo label. But just another guy with unmistakable tone, a really classy player. I think he's versatile. I think he can play anything. I think he is also a bit lyrical with melody as far as his playing goes. I chose this album because it's hard for me not to talk about Django Reinhardt when you talk about the greatest jazz players ever, guitar players ever. And similar to Charlie Christian, I just don't have a lot of his stuff. I mean, I've streamed it. I know it. There's like some anthologies you can really reference that are really nice to get. But I picked this album because this is an album for Django where Joe Pass does quite a few Django Reinhardt tunes and really plays in the spirit of Django on this record as far as the style and tone that he uses. And I don't know the other musicians on this album. I probably should, I guess, if they're playing with Joe Pass. But so I guess I know John Pisano. So it's a second guitar player, which is really cool. You don't get that often. And then you get Jim Hugert on bass and Colin Bailey on drums. I just don't really know those guys. If any of the aficionados in the office, in the audience can school me to that would be cool. But it's hard to make this list and not bring up Joe Pass and have some kind of Django reference. So that's my final pick on guitar, and just a sick guitar player.
That's a good one, man. I'm glad you brought up Joe Pass. Cesar, if it was a competition, you would have won, my friend. You would have won, baby.
I feel like Cesar saw my notes. I don't know what's going on, but he's in my head.
Can you see my screen, Cesar? What's going on here? Oh, man. Good stuff, dude. Good stuff. All right, man. Somehow we managed to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. It only took us an hour and a half to get through it, but some great records there, man. I made my notes. So, yeah, I'm going to definitely check out some of the stuff you mentioned.
Yeah, I'm going to go back into Pat Metheny because I was there for a short time, and I don't know what happened. I just got away from it, but I do like your parallel to Jerry. That's a good way for me to get back in the right frame of mind to give him a shot. So
yeah, some of the stuff, like I said, I've discovered him only recently, the last couple of years, and it's kind of like, sometimes you're just in the mood for something. And when I got into it, I was like, oh, I got to get all the Metheny I can. So I ended up picking up I don't know, I picked up a handful, 6 or 7 of his records and was really into it and stuff. But that's kind of how, I don't know, that's how it is sometimes. At least that's how I am. I discover something new and I get really into it, and then I get into something else and and stuff. So, but eventually it all comes full circle, so.
Well, like on all 3 shows so far, what I love about your picks is you're forcing me out of my bookends, right? It's very clear if you watched a few episodes, where my wheelhouse is and what I love. That doesn't mean I don't listen to the other stuff, but you've stretched me now out to the fusion world, and you have me going back old school. Like I lost my mind when you showed that Basie record last week. It was one of the, I was thrilled that you brought that up because I forgot about it, and I was like, oh, the album is so good. So I think it's cool, the spectrum that we're hitting. And the scary part about these shows so far is that I'm surprised we haven't gotten beaten up a little bit in the comments, because we have left off some serious players.
I know, dude, no doubt. Well,
Right?
I'm glad you mentioned that, dude, because we're not leaving them out this Wednesday when we do our live fantasy draft, dude. I mean, I think we covered pretty much all the bases there. And not to cut you off, but it just made me think of that. And I mean, Chris, man, he came up with this great idea, dude. And I kind of picked up the ball and ran with it. He was kind of like, hey, look, here's a football. And I was like, give me that. And we're running into the end zone this Wednesday. Again, who's going to be with us on Wednesday? Let's tease it.
So I for me, these are 2 of my favorite people to view videos on. Obviously Felipe of Jazz Bums, just like a central watch for me whenever I can. And then one of the first guys I followed in the vinyl community was Whatcam Brown, or WCB Jazz. And these guys forgot about jazz more than I know. Forgot more about jazz than I actually know, I should say. And they're great people. They seem very enthusiastic about what we're doing. There's gonna be some controversy Wednesday night. I know there's gonna be some picks that are stolen, and I think the coolest part about this is we're really gonna have audience participation. So you guys are really gonna decide the winners of the draft. And Jason, why don't you talk about the format, because it's not just gonna be one draft.
Yeah,
it's gonna be a couple different stylings rolled into one.
Yeah, it's going to be super fun, man. So just to kind of grease the skids a little bit for you guys on Wednesday night, 8 p.m. Central. Like Chris said, we got some amazing guests are going to be here. We're really kind of hyping this up and trying to get a big audience in here, because we all have to make a case for why we've selected the band members that we did. And we're going to kick it off with a trio, and then we're going to make our case for why our band is best. And it's going to be just like a fantasy football draft or something, right? We all get to select from who with these band members, if we have to select a bass player or a drummer or a guitar player, a saxophone player, or whatever, assemble our bands. And everybody only gets to select an artist once. So once Miles is off the table, it's off the table for everybody. Sorry about that. Let me fix that. Once Coltrane's off the table, it's off the table for everybody, right? So that's really cool. Anyway, we go from a trio. We all make our case on why our band is best. And then you guys vote a winner. That's the thing that is super cool about this. Every draft is going to have a poll. You guys vote. Whoever you guys vote for wins. Then we go into the quartet. Then we go into the quintet. I think Chris wants us to go into a sextet. So we're going to do like 4 different drafts. And each time with a little different strategy for the kind of band that we pick. And you guys get to decide who the winner is. So I'm excited for that, man. That is going to be super, super fun and fun, just kind of tripping people up too. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I haven't slept in 2 weeks since we decided to do it. I've got scouts out in the field. I have historians aggregating data for me to make sure I make the right pick. And there might be some intel at your location, maybe looking at some of the notes you have. So, it's no coincidence that Cesar knew a lot of what I was going to say tonight. I'm just throwing that out there. Just be careful.
Okay. I'm sorry about that, guys.
Yeah,
I should have deleted my memory card before I started. More technology, more problems. You know what I mean? Anyway, well, yeah, I'm stoked for Wednesday, dude. I can't wait.
Now, not to jump too far ahead of ourselves here, but in the spirit of our show, we need to decide what we're going to talk about next Monday. And I would like to talk about drummers.
All right, drummers. I like it.
You're okay with that? You don't have any?
Well, I think, we got trumpet players we still got to do, right? We got to do drummers. We're going to have to do some kind of a catch-all, I feel like, because we're leaving out so many people. We got to do how do we get Alice Coltrane in here? How are we going to get Bobby Hutcherson in here? How are we going to get, so we got to do that. But I like it. Drummers next week, man. That's a fun one. That's a really fun one.
Yeah, that'll be good. And I like your idea of after the trumpet, kind of the 9 p.m. Eastern, 8 Central on Wednesday. It'll be a prompt start because we have a lot to go through, and we're all really excited. But yeah, 9 p.m. Eastern, 8 Central. I do like your idea of after we get through kind of like the core instruments that we have this who did we forget category, because I've never heard you talk about Bobby Hutcherson over the past 3 weeks, and I think he needs to be discussed, Jason.
Absolutely. No way would be a crime to not include Bobby Hutcherson. So, I mean, I'm a little biased, of course, but
and I'm not a big vocalist, but maybe we have to throw a couple vocalists in there. There's a couple that I really near and dear to my heart. There's a lot we can do. So stay tuned.
There's a lot we can do. Yeah, stay tuned. Check out, especially guys, we're working hard for this Wednesday. I think, man, that's going to be a great time to be here. 6 o'clock on the West Coast, 8 o'clock Central, 9 o'clock Eastern. Again, we got some fantastic guests that are going to be here, and you guys get to get involved. That's the most exciting part for me, is that you guys are going to get involved in deciding who wins and who loses on this. But also, too, this is just going to kind of get everyone kind of, lubed up for the future and continuing to do maybe another draft, or who knows how many drafts, who knows what the future holds. But what I'd love to do, though, is get some of you guys in here. You don't have to be on camera, but like in the chat, and really have your spots and to be able to pick your own jazz groups. I think that would be super cool, and kind of pit, everyone against each other and stuff. That would be really, really fun.
Yeah. And one thing I'll say too is Jason and I are pretty sure that no one in the vinyl community or music community has ever done this before. So
I'm just saying never. And if they say that, this is the first one and only, this is the only place you're ever going to see this.
Exactly. Well, Jason, another great week, man. I enjoyed this conversation. I think going back a week, we're like, are we going to be able to fill this one? But then, as the days went on, it was just overload for me. I had to cut a lot of stuff out. I know you did too. So we thank everybody for joining. You guys are an important part of this. Thanks for all your comments, and we'll see you Wednesday.
Thanks, everybody. See you next time. Don't forget to check out the playlists also in the past episodes. We will add it. We'll add a playlist for this one as well. There's some really cool stuff in there. So check out those playlists. All right, guys. We'll see you Wednesday. Don't forget Wednesday. And also, if you're not following us on Instagram, please follow us on Instagram because that will tell you everything you need to know about what's coming up. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Chris.
Good night.
See you guys.